Awesome. So we're rocking and rolling. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I almost said good morning. It just flipped over. We're into afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Good, and I'm the Technology Integration Specialist at ESU1 in Wakefield.
And I'm Patty Finney, ESU 17 in Ainsworth, and I get to do some tech integration, but also a lot of curriculum support work.
Yeah, and let's get Laura an introduction here too from the top as well, since she's gonna be leading one of our breakout sessions. Laura.
Yeah, hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laura Plas. I'm a PD coordinator from Columbus in ESU 7.
Awesome.
Okay, well, we're going to jump right in. We wanted to start by repurposing the slide again from our friends from ESU 9, Amy Schultz and Kristen Schleitka. How are you today? We want to know how our friends are. So drop in the chat. How are you feeling today on this scale of 1 to 5? You can show by camera, that's fine. I'm pretty positive today. In this 2020 year that we're in, though, I am fluctuating from I've got this to, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can get through one more day. So if by chance you are on the lower end of this 1 to 5 scale, I'm hoping that maybe a little collaboration time with some of your friends today will give you a little energy and bump you up that list a little bit. This is just one really fast, quick, universal response technique that you can use with any of your training groups to get some feedback very quickly from all that are in attendance. Again, there's many ways to do this, and we'll talk about that later. And then you also, if you have them record in the chat, you kind of have a record of who you might need to touch base with you.
Exactly.
Our learning intentions for this session today, we are going to be learning to use assessments that drive feedback, and then in turn, how to give feedback that drives our instruction, which in turn means drives our learning. And then we're going to wrap out this session with some discussion about how competency-based grading can partner with feedback and assessment. So glad to have you all with us.
Yeah. And look at this amazing statistic. Holy cow, we're talking 0.66 impact. That is like amazingly high. So we know that all of you are educators, and you know how vital feedback can be. What we're really needing to emphasize here is the consistency, always touching and reaching out and touching our students in verbal language. We know that, right now it's all hands off and everything, but we really need to spend time keeping in touch with our students and helping to see where do we need to stand in the gap of their learning and help bolster them along the way. So this Hattie effect size, it's incredible. And if our feedback is done right, we will see growth and gains for our students.
Chris, I'm going to leave the singing to you.
Okay.
High information feedback, of course, is feedback that's coupled with some processes and some self-regulation. We as trainers need to make the answers to these 3 questions very clear. And most of the time, that first question is answered by your learning intentions and your success criteria that you provide to your group or your students. Question number 2 is usually answered when you provide learning progressions towards success. And then this question number 3 is what we want to really zero in today when we think about feedback is what is the specific tasks that your students or your participants need to do next to move them towards that success criteria. It really is that just in time, just for me information, if it's going to be highly effective.
When we think about the social emotional connections to feedback, creating those positive relationships, that's critical. And in the breakout session, Patty and I will be sharing some ideas on how teachers can be developing relationships with their students. You know, we were kind of put in a little bit of a quandary at the beginning of the school year where some of our teachers didn't even have the opportunity to meet their students face to face. So what can be done to create those positive relationships and then to sustain them? We also need to be thinking about the credibility of the teacher and how important that is. You know, students, if they have, excuse me, if they have a sense that their teacher they're not soundly based or deeply rooted in their content, they're going to start to blow them off, so to speak. So that credibility part is very important. And then the last,
I'm going to interject real quick, Chris, and I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but since it's in here, teacher credibility is actually going to be our lunch bunch topic for this upcoming Monday. So I'll just kind of like do a quick plug there and say we have a mystery guest too who's going to lead that session. So that's all the more I'm going to say about it. But for more on that topic, join us next week.
Cool. Then the last criteria, the last piece is that climate. And we really need to promote a classroom environment where making mistakes, it's okay. It's cool to do that. That's how learning occurs. Students need to feel safe in order to be able to put themselves out there. And that, you know, this all is kind of a nice flow, because if a teacher does not have this positive relationship with their students, and if they're not seen as a go-to person or someone that may possess all the answers, students are not going to be willing to put themselves out there and share information or share their visible learning, so to speak, with their classmates. So these pieces are very important to make the feedback that is provided to the students as effective as possible.
Okay, the feedback at a distance portion of the distance learning playbook highlighted 2 technology tools that have a high effect size. It highlighted the interactive video tools and intelligent tutoring systems. The interactive video tools have proven to be successful because they take some of that cognitive load off of the students when it allows them to rewatch the most difficult parts of their learning of the lesson. So, and many of us have used several of those, but the intellectual tutoring systems are those systems that sometimes require a little more of a financial commitment from a district, but they are systems that will assess where a student is, and then the feedback and the prompts and the direction is all very much geared towards how those students are answering those questions. This section of the book also talked about, we all need to remember that, you know, feedback is not that one and done option that we do on an assignment. It is that constant, regular check-in with our students. In the remote environment, especially with our littler students, this is a brand new way of learning for them. And so we need to be proactive in getting feedback from them, from which of the tools and the strategies that I'm doing as a teacher is helpful. Like, was my video clear? Did my slide skeleton notes, was that helpful? We need to also check in and ask our students, how are you self-regulating your learning? You know, did you use the video that I provided? All of these strategies, when we think about feedback, we also need to think about, I need to ask my students feedback about what I'm doing. And so then I know how to plan accordingly.
The formative evaluation pieces, again, Patty and I will be elaborating on some of these in Laura's session. She's going to be talking about criteria, but the 30,000 view of virtual exit tickets, Patty kind of gave you a sense of what one of those could possibly be with the questions that are posed to students. Exit tickets can be also that check-in, that social emotional check-in. Okay, we started class, where were you at? Now at the end of class, where are you at? So these can be pushed out with a variety of different tech tools. The virtual retellings, I saw this demonstrated with the webinar that Doug Fisher did, and he actually had some kids that were recorded. And what the essence of the virtual retellings does is it helps to ensure that the students have it and they're not being prompted by mom or dad or an older sibling that's sitting alongside them, feeding them information. The virtual retellings offer opportunities for the students to express their learning in their own words. Polling. We all know the polling features that you have available inside of Zoom, but there are other ways that you can be collecting information through some type of polling. And again, Patty and I will talk about what some of those tools are. And then practice tests. I've been out of the classroom a while, but even I leveraged practice tests on the front end so that I had a sense as a teacher as to where my students were at before we even dove into the content. And I also gave students opportunities for practice tests before we did that high stakes, overarching, summative assessment. So giving students opportunities to experience how you're going to assess them is a great way to prepare them for being successful.
Okay, Andrew, did you want to talk about this or did you want me to?
Yeah, I'm happy to set it up. My mic was off there for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, excited for some breakout sessions and for the conversations that'll follow too. And so this time we're going to split up into two conversations. One of those is going to be characteristics of high quality feedback. That will be in the breakout room. Laura Plas of ESU7 is going to lead that. And so when you get the option to take that exit to the breakout room, that would be for that particular session. If you'd like to stay in the main room here for formative assessment strategies and tools, then don't accept the breakout opportunity.
A lot of our districts were speaking to the fact that they were having a really hard time with their teachers providing feedback. They didn't know what to grade. They didn't know how to grade. They didn't know what they should be telling their students. So there was a lot of questions around feedback. And so feedback is something that I decided to learn a little bit more about. And it's also something, fortunately, that a lot of our districts have allowed me to come in and present on and start the conversation with their districts and their teachers. So I'm going to be sharing just a little bit about some of the things that I've learned, some of the things that I found to be most helpful for teachers. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about, is just what does high quality feedback look like and what are some features of it that we can communicate with teachers so they can share with students. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to share a video. This is from Mr. D. His whole series is going to be coming to Amazon Prime here in December, I've heard. If you've seen this before, he is a comedian from Canada. He was an actual teacher, and so a lot of his comedy is just spot on. So I'm going to play just this short example of maybe a non-example of what we should be doing with feedback. So we always talk about non-example. So I'm going to start with a non-example. Oops.
And now a sneak peek at the new comedy series, Mr. D.
There goes your weekend, eh, Markin?
Not really. Let me explain how this works. If these were regular tests, what I would do is I would find the smartest students, Maya, and I would mark hers first.
Right.
Then I'd use that as my answer key. But these are essay questions. Now, if I were to read these, it would take forever. So I don't. So I look at their mark going into it. Okay, like Maya, where's Maya? Has the highest mark in the class. There she is. So that's my answer key.
Don't you already know the answers?
Sometimes theirs are better. I got to give her a good mark, a couple circles, and then sometimes too vague.
Right.
That way I don't have to give her 100.
Yeah.
They only look
Keep
at
it
the mark.
realistic.
96. I give her a little more than she has going in. That way she won't come back and challenge me. Okay?
It's a good
Come on.
system.
Jimmy, look at Jimmy. Nothing.
Right, it's never nothing.
Garbage. Waste of time. 33. There's some words there, but I have no time to read them. So then I get angry. Jimmy, ridiculous.
Right.
This has got to stop.
He could say the same thing to you.
Okay? You got the system?
Yeah, it's a good system, buddy.
You do those ones.
You want me to mark them?
You don't really mark. You just
All right.
put marks on it. And you put a circle, you circle a
That seems
number.
good. I'm a forger.
Okay, here's Mike. Now, Mike has got a 62.
You should give him an 80.
Give him
That'll
an
make his
80.
day.
Make his day.
Right.
Okay. And he goes home. His parents are excited. I like that. Finally,
Like you've been rooting for him the whole
Yeah.
time.
about
Right.
time. Thank
That's
you.
good.
This person, Shauna, I don't like her. Drives me nuts.
Right.
So what I do is I fail her on the exam, but I just give her enough to pass the course, so I don't have to teach her again. So it's like a lot of check marks, some question marks, underline some things, couple good comments.
Mediocre.
I haven't used that one. That's a good one. Happy face, smile.
That's disturbing.
You are almost a teacher.
Mr. D, Monday starting January 9th.
All right. So like I said, that's from a comedy called Mr. D. He is one of my favorite comedians out there. When you watch that, I always ask my teachers, why is that funny? Why is that so funny? If you wouldn't mind just down in the chat box, hopefully we have the chat box feature. It looks like we do. Why is that funny? Why is that video so funny? Yeah, during this, teachers are giggling and laughing and kind of, looking around. But yeah, it's funny because there's a little bit of it that's true, right? There's little teeny tiny pieces of it that can be true. I, as a teacher, am guilty of sometimes doing that. And other teachers, when I go to districts, they're like, well, I know some other teachers that do that. I'm like, some other teachers, come on, we're all a little bit guilty of some of that. So again, we kind of want to get away from that, just circling and writing too vague, need more. We want to get away from that to actually moving more towards a place where this is what feedback actually looks like. Feedback in educational context is information provided to a learner to reduce the gap between current performance and a desired goal. So what we really want feedback to do is we want it to shrink that gap between where they are and where we want them to be. So that's what we want feedback to do, not just help us give them a grade so that we don't have to teach them again, but we want feedback to actually help them get to where we want them to go. And I always tell teachers that desired goal may not be the same for all students. It may not be the same. It may be the same, but there may be some situations where not all students have the same desired goal just based on what their goals and what their performance may be. So also what I wanted to ask you is, here's an example of feedback. So I know that this is a little bit small and a little bit grainy, but it's a math example. And so what they're asking the student to do is set up an inequality that represents the story and then solve each, show your work. So here is Luke. Luke has done his work and the teacher has provided feedback in red, obviously. And so what I'd like you to think about is, if you're a student and your teacher hands this back to you, how does this make you feel? And what would your next step be as a student? So if you wouldn't mind, again, populating the chat box. So first of all, how does it make you feel? And then what is Luke supposed to do? What should Luke's next step be? So I'm going to give you probably about 30 seconds just to look at this. I suck, trash the test. Yep. So yeah, when a student gets this back, right, it makes the students feel like they didn't do anything right. Everything's crossed out, right? And when the student says, okay, what should I do with this? What's my next step? Samantha nailed it too. She said, trash it. Yeah, what's my next step? Throw it away. I don't know what I did wrong. I know there's a lot of red, and I know that you crossed things out, and I know that I got 2 at the top, but other than that, I don't really know what I should do next. And unfortunately, this is a lot of feedback that students do get. All right, let me give you another example. So exact same problem, okay? The teachers provided feedback. So you can see here, the teacher has drawn an arrow and has changed it right here. So first of all, how does that make the student feel? And same question, what's the student's next step? So how does this make the student feel, and what is the student's next step? So overall, I'm seeing it down there. I didn't do too bad, right? There's not a ton of red, so I'm feeling maybe a little bit more hopeful. But yeah, Lisa, you nailed it. What's the next step? Well, I don't know. My teacher did it for me, right? My teacher corrected exactly what was wrong. I don't know why it was wrong, but she corrected it. And we always talk about he who does the doing does the learning. So here the teacher's done the work. The student doesn't have to do anything. So yeah, maybe they do feel a little bit better, but what the next step is I'm not sure. And a lot of times we see this, and I'm super guilty of this, you know, when we go into a student's first draft of their writing, and all we do is go through and cross out what's misspelled, or circle what's misspelled, or capitalize things for them. When we go through and make those corrections for a student, we're doing the work and we're doing the learning. So that's just something that, you know, we as teachers like to do. We like to fix everything. But when we fix things, we're not letting the students do the work. Okay, one more example. Now, at this point, teachers say, oh my gosh, Laura, I'm not going to write that on every single problem. And I'm not asking you to write that much on every single problem. But here's another example. And again, same question. How does it make the student feel? And what's the student's next step? So how does Luke feel? And what is Luke's next step? So again, one more time, if you'll populate the chat box for me. Yeah, absolutely. You guys, the chat box is perfect. So Luke knows what he needs to work on, his inequality symbols, and she's telling me where to go back and find help on this. And I get a chance to resubmit. So it's okay that I messed up. That's all right. So yeah, overall, the student feels hopeful. Okay, there's not a ton of red over all my work. You didn't cross anything out. So I now know that I need to go back and review what my inequality symbols mean, and I can resubmit it because it's okay that I didn't get it the first time. So again, just this feeling, this sense of hopefulness for kids, the idea that it is strength-based, it is actionable, that is so important. And that's where you're really going to get the most bang for your buck out of feedback. So one more thing I wanted to touch on is I can teach you 100 strategies for how to give feedback and what it should look like. But one of my favorite quotes comes from Pete Drucker, and he says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I can teach you all of these strategies, but if the classroom is not set up to have a culture of feedback, none of these strategies are going to matter. So it's really important that we set up a culture of feedback in our classroom, a culture where it's okay to fail. Learning thrives on error. And in fact, you should be failing about 15% of the time in order to push your learning and thinking forward. And when I think back to my first year of teaching and all my lessons that I did, I failed more than 15% of the time on average. It was rough. It was a learning curve, but I know that because of the struggles I had my first year, I'm a much better teacher because of it. And so we want to set up that culture of feedback for our kids where it's okay to not get it first or right the first time. You can resubmit. We can still work on this, even if the test was in the past. Now, a lot of times when I talk about this, teachers are like, well, you're just talking about like this hopeful, like unicorns and rainbows. And when I think of the word hope, that's not what I think about. I like this quote about hope. It says, hope is not a naive, sunny view of life. It's the capacity not to panic and to find ways and resources to address difficult problems. If that's what having a hopeful student means, then yes, I want all of my students to be hopeful, and creating a culture of feedback will hopefully help create that hopeful student. Okay, so when we talk about high quality feedback, there are 5 characteristics that high quality feedback needs to have. It needs to be specific, it needs to be actionable, it needs to quality feedback. So I'm going to go through each of those just really quick, and then we're going to get a chance to practice a little. All right, so let's start with specific. So what I mean by specific, like I said earlier, we want to fix everything that we see. As teachers, that's something that we want to do. But we want to be careful. We want to kind of operate in that Goldilocks principle. Know your students, know what's too much, know what's too little. They need enough feedback so they understand what to do, but not so much that the work has been done for them. And most experts on feedback will tell you that when you're providing feedback, it's important to focus on 1 or 2 learning targets at most. So don't talk about inequalities and setting up the problem and labels and this and that. Really focus in on 1 or 2 of the most important learning targets at a time. More than that, and students are going to get overwhelmed and frustrated. So we really want to make sure our feedback is specific. Next, this is huge. We want to make sure it's actionable. We want to make sure that when a student looks at that feedback, they know exactly what to do next. They shouldn't be left guessing. So as a teacher, it's important to ask yourself, after I provide this feedback, will the student know how to proceed? And if you're like, maybe they might not, maybe refer them to a resource, or hey, go back and look at chapter 2, or go back and look at practice problem 43 that we did together to brush up on where they went wrong. So give them a place that they can go to find resources and make sure that they know what to do after you've provided the feedback. The next one is goal reference. And really what this is referring to is we don't want to have any norm referenced feedback. So we don't want to refer their work and compare it to someone else's. We don't want to say, oh, well, yours was really short compared to other people's, or, you used a method that no one else used and it didn't really work. So we want to avoid that norm referenced feedback. It's beneficial to have established criteria for the bigger assignments. So we don't need a rubric for every single assignment that we give, but if it is a bigger assignment, having a rubric with some anchor pieces, some examples of what good work looks like could be very beneficial. And we say avoid norm referenced, but it is okay to do self-reference feedback. In fact, this can be really powerful for kids. To say something like, did you notice you had all the names capitalized this time? You had trouble with that last time. To show them how they have grown as a student and as a learner, as a writer, as a math student, whatever it is, but it's okay to do self-reference feedback as long as it shows them how their skills have improved their work. Strength-based, this is a really important one. And this is something I think that Andrew noticed, is that it starts out with a really positive tone. So overall feedback should have a positive tone. Again, we're not being fake. We're not saying this is the best paper I've ever read in my whole life, but we do want to have an overall positive tone. Describe how the student's strengths, how the strength in a student's work matches the criteria for good work. Again, help them make that connection between here's what you did really well and here's what really good work looks like, and look how great you did. Focus on the task. You can focus on the processing of a task. So how they actually process, that's something you could comment on. You could comment about their self-regulation or about the self as a person. So how their skills, how their skill set really helped them get further in this learning. And the last one is timely. And again, teachers tend to roll their eyes at these, but it is pretty important. They need to get feedback while they're still mindful of the learning target and while there's still time for them to act on it. It doesn't always mean immediate, but many times it does, especially when they're practicing a skill. You all know this. If you give them an assignment and they go home and they practice this one skill wrong 25 times, it's going to be so much harder to fix it when they come back to school. So it may need to be pretty immediate based on what you're working on. Now you can always ask a question, kind of to get them to think, give them space to figure it out, and then come back around and see how they're doing. So it doesn't have to be right then. It depends on what you're teaching, but it does matter that feedback be timely. So again, remembering our definition of feedback, which is we want to close the gap between where they are and where we want them to be, and remembering the 5 qualities or the 5 qualities of high quality feedback. It's specific, it's actionable, it's goal referenced, it's strength based, and it's timely. We're going to practice this a little bit. So this is a 4th grade example. This is from the NAEP test in 2002 of a paragraph. And we're going to consider this a fairly successful paragraph. So I'm going to let you read this. The prompt is describe what lunchtime is like for you on a school day. Be sure to tell about your lunchtime so that someone who has never had lunch with you on a school day can understand where you have lunch and what lunchtime is like. So I'm going to give you about, we'll do 30 seconds just to read through their paragraph. Okay, so remembering this is 4th grade, remembering that's what the writing prompt is, what I'd like you to do in the chat box is I want you to provide a piece of strength-based feedback. So here's this 4th grade piece of writing. What is one piece of strength-based feedback you could give to this student? What is something that they did really well in comparison to what good work is? So in the chat box, go ahead and tell me what is a piece of strength-based feedback for this student. Yeah, I love these. You did proper punctuation, Molly. That is so a me comment. Like, I'm a science teacher, and so I'm very technical. I'm like, well, you spelled most things correctly. You've described so many different elements. Yes, I love the details. You did a great job with punctuation. Perfect. Okay, so we started off with what did they do well and in comparison to good work. Okay, so next thing is with the same piece of writing, I want you to provide a piece of feedback that is actionable. Where can this student go from here? What is something that they can do next to help them be even more successful? So again, in the chat box, tell me a piece of actionable feedback for this student. What can this student do next? I like that, Lori. What makes the food so good? Yeah, could you describe what makes the food so good? I love that. Yeah, so the concluding sentence, might there be a better way to, yeah, exactly. Might there be a better way to wrap this up? How would reorganizing the sequence of the sentences impact it? I love that. I love leaving them with a question, like not telling them what the right answer is, but kind of guiding them there. That's fantastic. Okay, so I know we need to get moving. One thing I wanted to show is that not all work is going to be as fantastic as something that looks like this. Sometimes from a fourth grader, we get a prompt that looks like this. It is the exact same prompt, describe lunchtime, and this student struggles a little bit. This may be one of our fragile learners, okay? So again, last time in the chat box, I'm gonna ask you to do this. I want you to provide for this student a piece of strength-based feedback. What did this student do really well? So in the chat box, last time I'm gonna ask you to do it. What is something that they did really well? You're gonna have to stretch a little bit on this one. Oh, I love it, Susie. Your spelling is spot on. Oh, you had 3 great details. Yes.
After explain everything.
Doceri or Doceri, Doceri. It's free. And whoops. Kiddos can use that, or kids can use it, or you can use it. You're just kind of restricted with what it looks like, and there's some restrictions on the different kinds of annotation tools that you have available to you.
And Chris, it looks like we have full group.
Oh, okay.
Again.
All right. So, well, let's just have that full group jump in. Yeah, we're going to jump in to the Mentimeter. So what we want to know is what's in your toolbox. I'm going to post out here. There it is. There we go. So you should see at the top of your screen, we'd like you to go to menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen. And then we want you to tell us what is your go-to formative assessment tool. They're starting to come in. Looks like Google Forms is really bubbling up to the top here, Patty.
Yeah, I think that, I'm seeing a lot of them that we kind of had that we were going to discuss.
Yeah, if you, I'm seeing GimKit. If you have not investigated GimKit, this is a fairly new comer to the formative assessment realm. It is definitely not only gamified, but there's a lot of strategy that can be used by students when they're in the GimKit environment. So I would encourage you to, if you're curious, to investigate that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Even Kahoot and some of those things that we Quizlet, some of those things that we do when we're in face-to-face environments, some of them have premium features that allow students to individually play those games or to practice. So yes, you have to pay a little money for some of those, but it may be worth it if we end up, going remote for some time. So
yeah. Okay, I've got to stop my screen share to get out of Mentimeter here. And we'll go back to our slides.
We are kind of creeping up here on time
Okay.
to have our breakouts too. So yeah, feel
All
free
right.
to maybe kind of.
Yep.
I think that's where we're at.
Yep.
Perfect. Did you want to speak to this piece briefly, or is that a follow-up?
Well, we just were curious and we thought maybe this could be part of that breakout room discussion, is the competency-based grading piece. And some of the questions that we would like you to consider when you get into your groups is, are you supporting this with your districts? And if so, what does that look like? So we do have some questions that we would encourage you guys to consider, but this is our topic of discussion for the breakouts.
Yeah, and I also shared in the chat some of those conversation starters that this group put together. Thanks to Chris and to Patty and to Laura for those breakout sessions. And this is the time we made this space because we wanted to create informal opportunities for dialogue, and we want to make sure we have about 10-15 minutes to do that as well. So I'm going to randomly assign people to breakout rooms. Really appreciate your collaboration and voice in that. When we finish there, we're going to come back with about 4 minutes at the end to share some resources. Well, that was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. Competency-based is something that is interesting to entertain and to think about how that looks elementary to secondary level. And I would like to share here kind of at the close of things. Thanks for being engaged in that great conversation. We got some amazing things coming up here in the next couple of weeks. And so I wanted to just take a few moments to share those with you. First, on Monday, we are going to have a makeup of the teacher credibility session that was going to be scheduled before Thanksgiving, but I kept getting so much feedback from folks that we're trying to get everything done before we break for the holiday. And so now's not the time for a lunch bunch. So we moved it. And because we moved it, we're able to bring in this guest presenter. I got a national speaker that's going to come in for that. It's going to be so fun. When I was entertaining this topic, I was like, I know, this person would be really fun to pick their brain about this. So that person's going to join us. I said I'd give a clue out. And so this is a New York Times bestselling author that will be here. So there's one clue. Join us for the Love and Learn on Friday, and I'll give you another clue then. That being said, a couple more resources. If you're at all interested in some of the work that's being done with updating the teacher and principal standards, I did a podcast with Kim Snyder, Julie Downing, and Ryan Rickenbaugh on our recent episode of the Good Life EDU podcast. I learned a lot from that conversation that we're going to continue to create more episodes as that work evolves. And so if you want to kind of stay tuned on where that's at and where it's going, that'd be a great place to do that. Our Friday Love and Learns have been so much fun. And last week we had a ton of people on there. This is, if you're unfamiliar with it, on Fridays, we ask different folks from across our ESU network to join us to share one thing you loved and one thing you learned from the past week. It's about a 10-minute, just lighthearted conversation that allows us through Facebook or YouTube for people tuning in to post comments. And so we kind of pull those in live. So look for that at about 10:35 this Friday. And I'll be on there. Samantha Pavelka, I think, is still in here. She's going to be on there as well. We reached out to a couple more folks trying to get our lineup for that. But just a great, I leave that feeling so good because it's just awesome to be mindful and invest in that wellness piece. So make sure that you check that out on Friday. I've spent the better part of the last 4 weeks, along with a number of people even that are here with us here today, working on this remote learning teacher support site. And so if you haven't had a chance to check that out, I would just encourage you to peruse that. We got to a point yesterday where we launched it. And so it's kind of been making the rounds. But there are pieces within that site that I think any and all of us could find useful in our respective roles. Just really try to curate a lot of resources and get that in a way, organized in a way that we could share with teachers that would allow them to on demand kind of do some of their own professional learning. And so please check that out because a lot went into that. And you'll find when you get there, there are about 45 videos from our friends, whether that's SDA, TLT, doesn't matter. ESU's stepped up and stepped into this space and shared some awesome ideas. So if you've appreciated our conversation today, I would point you to that. There's my YouTube page also has that all curated into a playlist if that's a preference for you. And thank you, because I'm sure a number of you on here contributed to that content. And I'm just really grateful that we have that available to share. So that said, thank you so much to Chris Good, to Patty Finney, to Laura Plas, and to everybody else for today's lunch bunch. So much fun as always, and I really am looking forward to seeing everybody on this upcoming Monday. Don't miss it. Until then, have a great rest of your week.
Andrew, you will share our slides then on your, with the recording, right?
I will. Yep. Let me stop the recording here so we can chit chat for a minute. Stop share.